It's me, David Webb, and here's a highlight from today's show on Sirius XM Patriot. There are certainly many facets to the Chinese-American relationship. Strategic opponent, communism versus our Republican form of government, the societies, the cultures. And one of the key distinctions has to be that this is not about the Chinese people. You have over 1 billion dominated by some 90 million members of the Communist Party. There are many other factors to this. The balloon, the Chinese craft that was flown over the Aleutians, over Alaska, across Canada, through our airspace, by the way, around Russia, not in direct path. There's still a lot to be found out there about the point of origin and the flight path, which will help educate us more on this issue. Opens up a broader discussion of intelligently dealing with China. So we'll start with the balloon and my guest, Dr. William Parker III, who is also the author of Guaranteeing America's Security in the 21st Century. Bill, this needs to expand beyond the military, beyond the just a balloon in air quotes, to use the phrase, and to the strategies needed as well as the potential non-military danger of what was just allowed to traverse our country.
Well, you're absolutely right. But, when you think about it, we already have millions of people that are illegally in this country traversing the country on land. So not really a shock that you also have a balloon from communist China traversing the air above. So we need to deal with the border, and we need to deal with this, and we need to deal with the cyber issues, the TikToks, and the other organizations that are out there. So this is a complex issue that we need to get after.
And by the way, TikTok was also on the list for our discussion. That is literally millions of balloons, if you will, gathering information, biometric, social, business, all across this country and even in governmental areas where it hasn't been banned or effectively removed. But let's start with dealing with the balloon in China. It was shot down, and the first question is, what was the better alternative, and how would we have accomplished that or had a chance at accomplishing it, given that we had well over a week?
Right. So, I put out a piece last week and discussed the idea that instead of shooting it down, you capture it. You bring it down, similar to the forced EP-3 that was U.S. Navy EP-3 that was forced down by the Chinese, and they took it apart and then returned it to us, taken apart after they went through all the intelligence, et cetera. And by the way, they returned that, charged us for shipping, charged us for the cost of taking it apart, also charged us for the 23 people, Navy aviators, that were held captive there for 10 days. And so they charged us for that, too, and we paid for it. And they returned our aircraft to us in 2 Russian cargo aircraft, so just to completely stick a finger in our eye. So there's one. And then, you got the former Soviet Union shoots down Francis Gary Powers. Now, in both of those cases, those were manned aircraft, and we certainly had threat to life of American aviators. In this case, it's unmanned. And we have a real opportunity now to capture the thing, or we had an opportunity until we shot it down, to capture the thing, bring it down, and then prove to the world that, 1, it is a spy balloon, and 2, get all the technology out of it. As soon as you shoot something down from 60,000, 65,000 feet, and it plummets to the earth and hits terminal velocity on the way down, about 120 miles per hour, and smashes into the ocean, it's like hitting a concrete floor. And then it sinks to the bottom in salt water. So not really the best of options, in my opinion.
Yeah, we had the pack in Alaska, the snowpack made difficult recovery, but different scenario, sparse areas of this country, like over Montana, at any altitude for that matter. The idea that we're going to recover much of anything of significance from this craft, which is what it is. The term balloon is used, but this is a very sophisticated craft, not a dirigible being raised over tanks in World War I or II.
No, it is sophisticated, David. You're spot on there as always. But the reality is we have very good rescue and salvage people. They will probably pull a lot of this thing together. You saw the articles in the newspapers around Myrtle Beach, et cetera, asking people if they find anything as it washes ashore to please provide that. So this was not a perfectly executed event either. Don't blame that on the military. They're following what they're told to do by the administration, but there were better ways to recover this entire thing than shooting it down and then seeing this huge debris field that's dropping into the ocean right now.
A curious point in the timeline, and for me, it actually started with a thought back to my childhood, for that matter. At one point, my uncle was, as you know, former naval officer, was one of those charged with being part of a recovery mission for returning spacecraft in the early days of space exploration. And we positioned. What I heard in the reporting over the weekend was that Navy was several hours away. And along the Carolinas, if there's one place Navy is rarely ever several hours from, that close to shore, is hours away. So am I missing something in the lack of planning? It's a slow-moving object. You deploy the F-22. You plan this ahead of time. Biden said this was done, the order was given days before. And again, not blaming the military. They're following the orders. We have various forms of submersibles, not just Nautilus class and other class submarines, which, would not come in. We have so many ways to be prepared to move quicker to a high current area in water that deep. So am I putting too much into this? Am I missing something? I mean, you've commanded a squadron. You know how to place ships.
Yeah, I was scratching my head a little bit when I saw that those reports as well. I think that there are a couple things going on here, one of which is if you can't get your ships in place to shoot down a balloon that's basically going 0 miles an hour very slowly, then are you going to be able to put your ships in place in order to shoot down incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles? We know how to do this. We're very good at this. We didn't demonstrate that we're very good at this in this particular case, but we are good at this. The other thing is that rescue and recovery of something this simple doesn't have to be done by the U.S. Navy to start with. You have the Maritime Administration. You have NOAA ships out there. You have military Sea-Lift Command ships out there. There are a lot of ships, not to mention the fact that we have a lot of civilian companies that have their own vessels that are built to recover spacecraft that they're launching and recovering. So I think there was probably a better, a faster, and more efficient way to do this. But you have to give those operators on those ships time to respond. And if you wait till the last minute to make a decision, or you keep that decision to yourself until the last minute, you may not be able to get the ships there in time.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up. And I want to keep going and going further on dealing with China overall. But what are your thoughts based on where we are now and what we know about how this should be handled? And to add into this, granted, your experience is significant. I always appreciate your input. Your book is my course load on this. And over the years, your experience has been key to this. But part of it was also in the Pentagon. And I am concerned about those who are supposed to know better, plan better, and execute better when I can see it from the outside looking in, but you've been on the inside, something's missing here, Bill.
Yeah, there are people in the war plans division. There are people in the strategy shops. There are people in the exercise shops, the logistics shops, et cetera, the 3, the 4, the 5 in the Pentagon, if you will, that are all individuals that are well trained, well educated, but they have to have some kind of heads up if they're going to put assets in place. You can have the best plans in the world sitting on the shelf, but if you are not able to execute those in a timely manner, as an example, you can have the best plan in the world in Iraq, but if you're told you have to remove all of the security forces and all the military forces in order to, but we want you to continue to be successful in the political world and the economic world, it's probably not going to happen. You have to have those all together. So I do believe that there are a lot of folks there that have the right ideas, that are very, very smart, but that are not given the time or the support to execute the mission in a way that would be successful. Look, putting an F-22 Raptor, one of the most sophisticated stealth aircraft in the world, up to shoot down a balloon is pretty insane. There are much less sophisticated aircraft that could have done that for less of a price. Now, if you want to go up and test the F-22 to see if it can shoot down a balloon, okay. But there are plenty of other aircraft that could have done this.
Let's go to the what should we do now? And you write about this in your piece. We have a situation. How do we, from a strategic position and in dealing with China, but also with respect to the world that is watching, what do we do now? Or what should we do now?
First, backing up just a little bit, if I could, David, the one thing I will say is that although I would have very much rather them, the administration, to have recovered this balloon rather than shoot it down, they did do something. And we do have to give them credit for it. At least they didn't just let this thing float away and do nothing. They did shoot it down, and that's a pretty aggressive move. So, kudos for doing something. Do I think it was the right thing? I don't. I think recovering it was the right thing. But moving forward, what do we do? I think first we need to go back very quickly, not take months or years or come up with a bunch of think tanks to spend the next 2 years assessing it, but spend a week or so, bring in people that focused at the war plans division before, people that commanded ships and aircraft, et cetera, policymakers, bring them together and say, all right, in a couple days here, let's come up with the quick lessons learned, and more importantly, with those lessons learned, apply the new policy procedures that need to be in place so that we don't do this again. Secondly, I think we need to make it very clear to China that we're not going to be distracted by this little game with your little balloon. Yes, it's a big deal because it was certainly spying on us, et cetera. But there are other big issues out there: Taiwan, economic espionage in general, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we're dealing with China. And now we've put that off again and focused on this thing instead of the bigger issues between the United States and China. So, Tony Blinken's a really smart guy and can certainly deal with these issues with the Chinese, and I'm sure he was prepared to do so. I think it was a mistake to fall into this trap of focusing on this one issue and not being able to demonstrate that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. In other words, what we should have said was, China, we've just captured your balloon. We're taking it apart. We may or may not send it back to you eventually. We'll charge you for it like you charged us for the EP3. But meanwhile, let's get on with these other big issues. That, to me, is what should have happened. What should happen in the future, let's assess our mistakes and not turn it into a political thing, but instead say, okay, this is how we need to move forward as a country.
The top of the chain has to make that decision. The leadership has to make that decision. And, I apply, in a sense, the two can't be true principle here, Bill, with the messaging coming out of the White House, DOD. It contradicted itself in 3 points right down the line. Did the Trump administration, did it happen then? But if it did, the SecDef didn't know. If the SecDef didn't know, did DOD know and not tell civilian leadership? I think you can understand why, when they say these things that contradict what is common logic or sense and not requiring of secrets, and as you know, I've checked with others within the prior administration and current people, it just doesn't add up.
Yeah, so I think one or two things. Either it happened, and then this administration realized it happened in the earlier administration, and if it did, why didn't they have a plan in place? This administration have a plan in place to respond to something that they knew has happened in the past, or else it didn't happen. So you kind of can't have it both ways there. I don't know whether there were balloons over top the United States during the past administration. I just don't know. But if there were, then that information would be passed down to the next administration. Then you have to ask yourself the question whether or not or why they didn't make any preps to ensure that this doesn't happen again during their administration.
The other area of concern, and I realize that it's not over the United States, but I've looked at this from the outside looking in, and I've seen efforts that match or at least could be part of a strategy to have a better intelligence gathering and a mapping, if you will, of areas around the world. Latin America. And I've been in touch with officials in Colombia. Some in Costa Rica have responded. And while they lack the capability in some cases, Defense Ministry in Colombia is very concerned about this. Others are as well. China's active in Latin America, very active in Latin America. And, this is not just the United States. Canada, Trudeau has been missing on this flying across his nation at its own speed and controlled flight. So what's going on here? I think we should be concerned about China's gathering of intelligence. And then to that point, your thoughts on TikTok as a part of this.
Yeah, so I think the gathering of intelligence is huge, whether it's by spy balloons, it's by cyber attacks, it's by people in our universities or in our best companies, et cetera. There's lots of spying going on. There's no doubt about that. I think perhaps the bigger issue here than even all that, which is big in itself, is demonstrating to China and the rest of the world how long it takes us to make a decision and how long it takes to actually execute something, respond to something. And so in some ways, I think that the indications and warning that we are demonstrating is even if you put something over our country, it's going to take a long time to respond to it. So, let's say the next time there's a balloon over top, it has some sort of a weapon of mass destruction on there, whether it's chemical, biological, nuclear, et cetera. That's a huge issue. What happens if you start having a bunch of balloons that are put over the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast of the United States, and all of a sudden you start having fires all over the West Coast? Those are the types of things that I think we need to pay very close attention to. And again, build a plan on how to respond and demonstrate that we're not going to respond in 3 or 4 days as you drift across our country, but we're going to respond before you get into our country, and we're keeping an eye out for our friends and allies around the globe as well.
I talking with you is just the beginning of a conversation and a thought process. We get into so many important aspects of this. And before we wrap this, but I think, matter of fact, I have a feeling we'll be doing this again next week. I think there's more coming according to just the process we've seen play out over time. Civilian infrastructure, Bill. And I've put this on the table for the audience. You and I over the weekend touched on it, but water systems, power generation, cellular transmission, even all of this and more, communications and infrastructure, geography, you name it. That's valuable information, and the media spent a lot of time putting maps up of military bases. But, I've started just doing it on my own, trying to identify key points. It's frankly not that easy, but it's important.
Well, it's hugely important. And David, as you know, you were one of the guys I reached out to when I decided to open Parme, a consulting company on infrastructure vulnerability 10 years ago. And actually, when we did that, when we opened it up, we said we realized that the government is not going to be able to protect all of these organizations on its own. And so the individual companies, the individual cities, the individuals themselves need to be prepared in such a way to defend themselves. And so you do that by hardening your cyber, by making sure that your water is clean, by making sure that if you have certain events that you have generators if you need them, et cetera, and the list goes on, that you're vetting your people in a proper way and then re-vetting them on a regular basis to ensure that you're not losing key information, intellectual property of your company, et cetera. And so we did that at Parme, and it's been pretty successful for pretty big companies. But I think we need to probably focus on that more. And from a national level, we should be looking at infrastructure vulnerability in a major way and say, what are those key infrastructure pieces that could take us to our knees? Is it losing the internet? Is it losing Fox News? Is it losing the David Webb show every day? Is it losing water? Is it losing what? What is it? Is it draining down your fuel reserves so you don't have enough fuel in place if you go to war? I mean, there's a reason that there's national reserves there. Those kinds of questions, there need to be very serious assessments of that, and put that together and then say, these are the lines that we are not going to cross to ensure that the country remains safe in time of war.
Dr. William Parker, the third CEO of Parker Maritime Technologies, and as you all know, the author of Guaranteeing America's Security in the 21st Century, and so much more, Bill. Always appreciate your insight. These conversations are not just important, we need to inform the American people of the threats, the possibilities, and what are the needed actions, and I always appreciate your input on that.
David, it's always a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for all you're doing for the country.
Thank you. Again, this is why we have to dig deeper. This is a responsibility we have. The concern that our leaders, civilian leadership, military leadership, are taking or not taking actions that are either common sense or questionable should concern us all, because in the end, it's about all of us. You can join me live on The David Webb Show Monday to Friday, 9 to noon East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.